RCAST.
Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Awesome. Welcome everyone to the newest iteration of the Climate and Coordination RCAST from RChain. We are very excited to continue bearing witness to what is happening in our rapidly changing world and communities. And this week is the next in that series. So I'm going to start today by talking about this first story. I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussion about it. This is a really fascinating week in climate news. There's a lot happening. And I'm sure after this we're going to get into some more coordination stuff. And I understand Greg might be asked some questions about RChain as well. So anyway, to start, we have a piece from The Guardian. This is from Friday, September 18th, 2020. Author called Eleanor Roy from Queenstown. And she talks about, this headline here says, New Zealanders rank climate change above COVID this election. So basically what happened is that New Zealand is having an election on October 17th. The Guardian, the publication The Guardian conducted a poll asking voters to select their main election issue, it sounds like, and more people chose climate change than COVID, and I have a theory about that. I think it's because, COVID will end eventually, but this climate crisis does not have an expiration date, not yet. And actually it was the top response, not only in a majority, but in 90% of the responses. And this is an interesting piece. They just take some quotes from some different voters in all age groups from 19 to age 19 to age, it looks like up to at least 70, at least 71. Anyway, so it's a very wide, generational sample. 79. So you get to just hear from all of these different people from all these different generations. It also says where they live. Some of them have very short, little quippy responses, and some of them have kind of longer, moral responses. But some people also ranked, for the people who ranked COVID the first crisis, there's quotes for that. And for the people who ranked poverty, inequality, and social infrastructure number one, there's also quotes for that. So anyway, I just thought it was a really interesting little piece, and I really applaud the people of New Zealand for, kind of showing the world, a lot about how to govern a nation, but also really being educated and smart and looking to the future and realizing that this COVID thing is not going to last forever, but this climate crisis really is, it's going to take a while to solve, it could be decades. And, we might not ever, even if we do solve the emissions problem or the biodiversity loss problem, which are the two big problems, we still might not, change the temperature here on Earth, the living conditions for people and for wildlife for a really long time after that. So anyway, I'd love to know what you guys think about this one. Really interesting story.
Well, I thought it was, it didn't really come as a huge surprise, given it's New Zealand.
Yeah.
Because they've had this view of their own ecosystem that's very, very, very protectionist for very good reason. So it doesn't come as a major surprise. And I've been to New Zealand, so I kind of have seen what it's like firsthand. I think from an RChain perspective, what gets really interesting is when you have a society that has that view, despite everything else that's going on around them in New Zealand, and a society that's quite open, with a prime minister that's very open to new ideas. When you look around in that ecosystem, you find companies like Loomio, which I know RChain has heard of before because they ran some workshops. And what's interesting about Loomio, coming back to RChain, is it's a platform for discussion to help you make effective decisions in a more decentralized way. But the problem that it will have ultimately is it's centralized, right? So what would be brilliant is if we could at some point get to Loomio as our next bit of major work in the community, once RChat and RVote are really sort of bedded in, and do the same to Loomio, we would free them up from the issues of centralization. And the sort of people that use Loomio today is Manon Couillet, who's the head of Citizen Mobilisation Zero Waste in France, and people like Paul Martin, who's the director of the Low Carbon Society in the UK. So you immediately, through finding these sorts of companies, these tech companies that are looking at collaboration efforts in New Zealand in particular, you find a set of well-connected people and organisations who are exactly the sort of people we want to be able to help. That was my first thought, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like New Zealand just seems to be a very civilized place. You know, like the fact that it's two women that are, competing for the election is pretty awesome. It's like, I want to move there. But I'm curious about Loomio a little bit, because is it an open source project or not?
Yes.
Okay. So
and it's run by a cooperative.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Loomio.org, or if you look at Loomio on Wikipedia, you'll see the same. They're based in Wellington. I mean, I've had lots of discussions with them before RChain existed. So I've known about them for a long time. So a lot of organisations, for instance, Wellington City Council, use Loomio as a mechanism for having discussions with their electorate.
Okay, because like I'm on a mailing list. I've never actually signed up or started using it, but
well, you can watch the demo. You click on watch the demo and have a look. Okay. And in the same way that with RChat, for instance, which is based on Zulip, what we've done effectively, and we're still in the process of doing, and I'm supposed to be one of the contributors to that, which I'll get to shortly once the business plan's sort of out of the way. We want to be able to take anything that runs on a Postgres database using something like Django, or maybe even Django becomes irrelevant, so that what we become is the decentralized backing store for whatever that platform is. So in this case, Loomio. And that's just a common integration point, which means that we can cookie cut the solution to fit anyone that's doing that. So once we've done RChat and learned all the lessons, we should be able to apply it the same and do it way quicker for something like Loomio.
Wow, that is so cool.
Have a look, and there's I think there's YouTube demos of Loomio. And what's nice is it's a cooperative run out of Wellington in New Zealand on the southern tip of the North Island. It's their capital. Wellington's their capital.
That's amazing.
Another one I'm curious about is Discourse. Do you know about Discourse?
I haven't looked at Discourse.
Because apparently it's another open source kind of forum type software.
Right.
I don't know how it differs from Loomio, but yeah.
Well, it's more like a RChat or a Discord or a Slack.
Okay, yeah, that's how I was picturing it. So how is Loomio not like those different ones?
Oh, it's implemented much differently,
Okay.
and Loomio is more. It's really more around voting.
Yeah, it's deliberation and decision making. That's kind of how they see it. They don't necessarily talk about voting, but they are really, and it facilitates that. So the sorts of organisations that go to Loomio is when we had the anti-fracking campaign here in the UK. That's where the anti-fracking campaign went. Yeah, some people will also use WhatsApp along with it, but they wouldn't use Facebook because that's far too open. So they used Loomio to do all of that, and that enabled them. When you think about what RChain's for, it enabled them to coordinate lots of groups up and down the country.
I just noticed on the Wikipedia entry of Loomio, it says that it emerged from the Occupy movement.
Yeah. Yeah, so that tells you why it's a co-op and why its users are generally those sorts of users.
Very interesting. So I wonder if there's something that would a way to kind of like take what Loomio can do as far as kind of collaborative thinking and what something like Discourse or other forum-ish kind of softwares can do. Like, I wonder if there's a way to kind of...
There might be. I mean, you've got to approach these things one step at a time. So once we've got RChat done, then we know what the architectural pattern is to be able to provide decentralization of something that is centralized. So, Loomio runs on a collection of servers, and that's a pretty small collection of servers at the end of the day. They might be in the cloud, but it's a pretty small collection of servers, and it's not like a DApp. So, and it's not decentralized. So somebody controls those servers. Somebody makes sure the lights are kept on and does upgrades to those servers. Whereas if it's decentralized, running on RChain, if the network partitions, and a third of the RChain network went down, the DApp carries on, but that may not be the case if Loomio's servers go down. You basically have a client handle to nothing. What you've got with the blockchain and a decentralized app is very hard to bring down. It's like you can't turn the web off. You can't turn a DApp off. And with all the security built in, and coupled with, for instance, the transparency that's engendered by knowing that Nora said this to me, and then in time I said this to Daryl, and then Daryl said this to Ian. You've got a lineage. So if you're just picking up where Ian and Daryl have had some exchange, you can also go back in time and say, oh, I see how that exchange happened.
Oh, that's great.
So
you don't have to actually ask someone for a recap. You can just go and
essentially, I mean, that's the beauty of a blockchain, right? So if you do it in the right way, so that you're following, basically it's like a thread. The thread is on the chain, so nobody can remove their item from the thread.
That's got to be the word of the week.
So good idea not to lie, because you'll get caught out. Somebody will catch you out at some point, and it will be there for all to see.
Yeah.
Unless you're Donald Trump, in which case you just lie anyway.
Well, it's there for all to see.
Or you're Lindsey Graham, and you just lie anyway. Or you're Mitch
we're gonna get in trouble now.
Well, then it's like it's there for all to see. But unfortunately, for some bizarre reason in the evolution of mankind, some refuse to open their eyes.
In the evolution of humankind, we can say.
Humankind.
Okay. So anyway.
Humankind. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So let's get to the next story here, because I just wanted to make sure that we touch on these, and then we can continue. So this is a really fascinating piece by the New York Times. I have never seen. Oh, I already put it in the chat. Okay. I have never seen a piece like this before. I think it's pretty unprecedented. Not in journalism globally, but in the United States. I just haven't seen anything like this. So anyway, this is New York Times. Capturing the Faces of Climate Migration. This is by Libby Peterson. So it looks like we have 2 female journalists featured today, which is awesome. September 19th, 2020, very recently. The subtext here, I'm not sure what that's called. What's underneath the headline, whatever. A Times Magazine series, that's New York Times, examines how climate change will force millions worldwide to move. Recently, a woman named Meredith Kohut, photographed people on the front lines of this shift in America. Okay, so this is why it's very groundbreaking. This is a really fascinating piece. It's got photos, and then they interview some of the people who captured this, basically this cultural shift in America. Of course, there's been lots of pieces about climate migration, climate refugees in other parts of the world, but now we're starting to see this is really happening in the United States much more frequently. And it's just a really fascinating piece. So for anybody who's curious about the state of, climate migration in the United States, I think this is a really amazing piece which can help build not only awareness, but empathy, and a lot of other really important things. But I'll just say this is a really great piece because they really talk about, how dangerous the conditions are when documenting this stuff, being very close to fires, very close to floods, things like that. Also comparing the crisis of the failing of crops in large parts of Latin America, which is another, of course, refugee situation, which has, influenced America. A lot of people have left Latin America, come to the border in Mexico with the United States because of failing crops. That's something that's very often overlooked. And now in places like Arizona, in the United States, they're finding that the same things are happening. The crops are failing. So basically all of this stuff is just moving north, geographically. It's just a really fascinating piece that I really I encourage everyone to read. And I hope that there's a lot more in the mainstream news in America, especially about climate migration, because there are a lot of American climate refugees now from the fires all over the West Coast, and even inland from the West Coast, from horrible hurricanes, from floods. I mean, the first climate refugees that I ever met in America was when I lived in New York City. I was in college. I just started college in 2010, and I met a bunch of people from New Orleans who had left because of Katrina in 2005, and they had moved to New York and they'd settled in New York. And of course you could say, well, isn't a refugee someone who's like, on the move or whatever? But of course, people can settle down. And at Juilliard and the New School and NYU and all sorts of schools there where I would hang out, I met lots of climate refugees, and I'm not sure if they think of themselves that way, but that's what happened. They were forced to move because of a climate catastrophe. So anyway, this is a really great piece. So I'd love to know if anybody has any thoughts about this, but I really wanted to bear witness to this writing.
My thought is that
yeah, go ahead.
well, my first thought is that this is a photographer, right? So I'd like to see her series. You can't really. I was trying to find a link from the article because a picture says 1,000 words, and I love the art of photography, especially when photographers use their art as a way of kind of just exposing what happened. So it's just like really good photographers to me in that art form are ones with like serious empathic skills that can see and notice things that no one else does, and then documents it and takes a picture and then
Absolutely.
documents it well, so that you look at the picture and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing art. So I'd like to see her actual work.
Yeah, where it says the series, did you see that in the I think it's the first
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
first paragraph? If you click on that little link, I think it's a series of let me see here. Let me go back to it. You should be able to see all of her photos.
Ah, there we go. Cool.
So let me know if that works.
Yeah, I'm just
For you.
looking at them now. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think the little interview is really interesting too, because they talk about, you know, how the situation is similar and different from other global climate refugee situations, and kind of what they experienced and what they had to go through. Series on global human migration. That's what it is. So yeah, it's just so if you click on that, it's called The Great Climate Migration. And yeah, it shows the crops that they have. It shows, well, this is more of a global, I guess, take, and the New York Times piece really focuses on the United States, but there are photographs from all over the world. So I guess you can pick and choose what you want to look at, but there's a lot of information. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, this is something that we know quite a lot about in Europe.
Yes.
The crisis that we have in terms of migrants crossing the channel across to get to the UK. God knows why they want to come here. Personally, I prefer to leave, but that's what they're doing. And when you look at
yes, but if you believe
Syria,
it, it'll be done by choice.
let alone Sudan, but let alone Sudan, right? So Sudan more easily see that it's driven by climate change, but actually Syria was exacerbated by a conflict.
Absolutely.
It was already a climate change issue before the conflict arose. The conflict made it worse.
Exactly.
So the Syrian refugee crisis is not entirely to do with a conflict. It's to do with climate change first and a conflict second. But it's always dealt with in the press
really
the other way
sets the
around.
stage.
In fact, climate change is never mentioned.
Well, yeah, and obviously, when there is a climate crisis like that, it disrupts the economy, it disrupts people's ability to eat, to get water, it disrupts everything. And, this is why I think it's really important to draw attention to what's happening here in the U.S. to build more empathy and understanding about how it happens, how desperate people become desperate, and that people are not inherently violent. They're not inherently criminal. It's that sometimes things happen that are outside of their control that are incredibly difficult. And I'm not saying that there is no such thing as, crime or anything, but I'm saying that, entire nations, entire communities of people are generally not that way. So we need to really learn to understand that this can happen to anybody at any time, and it's to no fault of their own. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys have the wildfires on the West Coast on the one side.
Yeah.
But you've also got a growing number of hurricanes coming in from the southeast, right? And so
we decided
all
that
of Florida,
one hurricane at a time is not enough now. So that's
no, and that's going to result in people being displaced. I mean, it already is, but it's going to result in them being displaced ever more. I wonder how, those people that are climate deniers, I wonder how they're going to cope with that when their nice Florida pad is under 6 foot of water.
Well, I mean, they'll do what they've always done. I can't remember if it's there's a disagreement in Florida about dealing with the climate crisis, and there's one official who's really got his head screwed on, and there's another one who basically just thinks that the flooding is, there's always an excuse. It's temporary. It's a problem
The
with
natural
sea.
cycle of the planet.
It's a
Yeah.
problem with the seawall. It'll resolve itself. It's high tide today. We needed to work on our infrastructure anyway. Oh, look, there's a fish swimming, on down the road. Isn't that fun? I mean, there is always an excuse. There's always an excuse. And, there needs to be a time when we say, this is not an isolated thing. That's what they always say. People who, I wouldn't say they're all climate deniers, but even the media treats these wildfires that are constantly growing, getting bigger, hotter, longer, more dangerous, more damage every single year. And it's not just over a few years. They're becoming more dangerous, more hot, more brutal, way more brutal than what was normal over decades and decades. This is not something that just is happening now. They always treat it like an isolated event. Oh my God, how will they rebuild? Oh, it's such a disaster. They never talk about the history of this continuing to worsen. And that's something that the media needs to do.
It's interesting. I remember my son pointing out the absurdity of a comment that Ben Shapiro made in one of his podcasts or interviews. He was basically accepting that the real estate prices in Miami and thereabouts are plummeting because there's so much flooding and
Here we go. I know where this is going.
people can see the writing on the wall, and so Shapiro was saying, well, they could just sell their houses and move, right? And my son said, who are they going to sell it to? Aquaman?
Yeah, exactly. Who is going to buy? What kind of, people with money, the kind of people who would buy an oceanfront house in that kind of area in California, Florida, or elsewhere, they're the kind of people who generally have, people counseling them on how to spend it. These are not poor people who, purchase things. Not to say that poor people are stupid, but they don't always have the most information. They're taken advantage of more often. And rich people have counseling usually that explains to them that it would be a bad investment to buy a house that is already flooded, for example, 3, 4, 5 times a year. So it's obscene. Yeah. And your son is totally right. Yeah. Who can you sell an asset like that to? I just don't understand. The Little Mermaid, possibly Ursula, Aquaman, there's a few people who might be interested, but that is honestly it. And that is one thing that really, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that really needs to be understood. It's not, that's why people become refugees. It's not a financial choice. You know what I mean? It's not something people do for fun.
Yeah, I mean, my heart really goes out to the families. One of the things that I've noticed as a father of 4 is that moving around a lot, it has a lot of impact on children. My limited experience is that children really, really benefit from being able to set down roots for good long periods of time.
Mm.
So refugee status is really hard developmentally. Now, of course, there are cultures that, like the Tuareg and others that are nomadic and do things differently. But at least within my experience, I've noticed that a refugee kind of lifestyle, if it's not a part of your culture to begin with, is very, very challenging for
children.
For the children, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we don't live in a global society, especially Western society, that really respects and supports that at all. We live in a society, and I thought that, America was pretty cruel toward refugees. But I mean, if you look at, things that happen in Europe as well, and just all over the world, people turning refugees away to basically just drown. It's insane. And I wonder, I think this piece is so important, because I wonder what it's going to take before we just stop, with this insane idea that like people who are in trouble don't deserve help, you know, for whatever reason. There'll be a race reason, or, you know, some other reason, or, you know, an economic reason, whatever it is. And it's like that, you know, mentality, talking about coordination, that's not going to work. It's not going to work, you know, like that's not how the world is going to heal itself, because it's going to happen more. It's going to happen, you know, just like a lot of, I mean, I hate to say it, but certain people who denied COVID got COVID. Some of them died. It's horrible. It shouldn't have to be that way. But, you know, there are some people who, you know, might not have a great attitude toward refugees, and then they might become refugees themselves, you know, and find themselves on the other end of, you know, some pretty difficult policy that they supported. And I don't want that to happen to anybody. I would really like the world to become more empathetic without having to learn a lesson a hard way.
Yeah, and there's no guarantee that, you know, just because we get over the hump with COVID, that there isn't another pandemic right on its heels.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so being a refugee during a pandemic is a very vulnerable place to be. So we have to really think about this very carefully.
I mean, here's a real story. So maybe it's somebody that we should have on this call. But there's a guy called Dr. Frank Arnold that I do a lot of work with. And he is the UN rapporteur on torture victims. And he started this thing called Forest Medical Legal Services to support asylum seekers in this country, to get a medical legal report in support of them gaining asylum because they're in fear of their life in some way, shape or form. But the Home Office here is quite right-wing, a bit like your own in the States. And under, you know, a fairly right-wing administration, you know, things are getting tougher for these people who have already been abused in some way, shape or form. So the latest thing, because they're really scared of leaving people in detention in an unjust way, because you're not, unlike in the States, when Obama was there and, you know, the rules were not to incarcerate really. Well, he decided to have a relaxed interpretation of whatever it was. You could have interpreted it another way, which is what Trump obviously has done.
I think it was supposed to be a last resort. And
yes, a last resort, but he does it as the first resort.
Exactly, the no tolerance thing. Yeah, exactly.
And so they're kind of scared of doing that here. And so there's a mandate in the Home Office that if there's any suspicion of somebody could sue us or whatever, they kind of try to get rid of that person. So there was a guy who was a refugee. He had been tortured. He was suffering post-traumatic stress disorder, and he was in London in a detention centre. And at 2 hours notice they gave him to pack his things up. He was being relocated, rehoused in a different sort of thing that's not a detention centre, about 200 miles away. He doesn't know the UK, so he's no idea where he's going. And his English is very poor. And it's in the middle of the pandemic. This is fairly recent. And they dropped him off at this place at like 11 at night. It was under lockdown, so he didn't really know how to get in. He slept on a park bench. Now, he was a COVID risk as well. That's not to say he had tested positive, but he was a COVID risk. So he hadn't been around for more than 2 weeks. So COVID, they dumped him on a park bench. So it's in everyone's interests, really, in a pandemic, to ensure that that you deal with people in a way that you can manage outbreaks, but at the same time ensure that you're not adding to post-traumatic stress disorder and mental illness, as our wonderful Home Office in the UK do. I mean, it's a dreadful story. Park bench, 11 o'clock at night. He's got no idea. He's quite young. He'd been tortured. Didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many stories about, refugee, immigrant, however you, expat, whatever you want to call them, course, when you're white and you go to a different country, you're an expat, which I find just incredible. But anyway, yeah, there's an amazing story that I was thinking about talking about this week. He was a young firefighter, you know, and he was deported after he fought these fires. And it's so sad because these people are literally saving the world and they don't have a home, and it's completely obscene.
Wow. Deported after fighting the fires.
Yeah.
That's, wow. Such
Yeah,
gratitude.
like he wound up in a jail. All the prisoners, of course, are asked to fight these fires for, you know, basically no money. You know, and then they sent him away. And I need to find the story. I can find it here in probably 1 second. But yeah, I mean, this kind of stuff is insane. And it all boils down to, I think, empathy, one thing, but also gratitude. You know, we're supposed to have gratitude for these people who, you know, help us. And we should provide people who are, you know, an asset to society. Whether that's artists, firefighters, whether it's, you know, teachers, or, you know, anybody needs to be provided with, you know, quality of life if they're working on behalf of the betterment of society, especially. I mean, all people deserve that, especially people who are putting their life on the line.
So I was wondering, we only have about 18 minutes left in the call, and I wanted to, I want to, you know, make sure we give due to these topics, but there were a couple of topics that I wanted to speak to if there's a general agreement.
Oh, absolutely.
So on the one hand, I just want to report some very good news. I've reported it on other venues, but it's it really is worth mentioning. We now have running traces of RChain blockchain running non-conflicting blocks in parallel, and we're already, as the team is working to go ahead and get the block merge code completed, we're already beginning to see additional places where we can where there was aggressive serialization that didn't need to happen. So I'm very excited. We will begin to see the performance potential of RChain in a very short period of time, and you know, certainly before the year, or so it seems from the progress that the team has made in the last few days. So this is just incredible, right? We're really starting to see it. You can see the traces, and one of the things that's really remarkable is if you look at the diagram that I posted with one of the traces, you can, if you stare at it not as just an abstract graph, but as a physical weaving, where the nodes are places where threads come together, and the arrows are literal strands of thread.
Where did you post it, Greg?
Twitter and a variety of other places, but I can certainly share it again.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So anyway, the thing about the diagram is that it shows that our approach to liveness, the synchrony constraint mechanisms, are related to braiding. So there are certain braids are allowable by the synchrony constraints, and certain braids are disallowed. And so you can actually apply knot theory to reasoning about synchrony, which is quite beautiful. It's a really nice unexpected consequence, but it just leaps out at you as soon as you stare at the diagram and go, oh my God, these synchrony constraints give you certain braids and not others. So it's a lovely thing, and it's just, you know, icing on the cake, because our approach, to liveness for the system does not require clocks or fixed box sizes. It's all based on these on-chain phenomena that that we've been very careful to follow those principles so that we don't have to introduce, a network time service or other kinds of things that might add to the trust burden. So it's very exciting, and I hope people can check it out.
Amazing. So I remember on the debrief when NutZipper was showing that kind of chart or diagram of the different blocks and how it kind of was resembling a braid, as you pointed out, and it just made me think about just the semantics of what we're calling this. Like, it seems like blockchain is just losing its power to define what it is we are doing. And is there a better word for it, like blockbraid or
blockbraid? I love it. That's nice. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah, blockweave.
blockweave. Yeah, it's like it's almost like if we can find a word that explains RChain better than blockchain or what's the other one that Pedro, distributed ledger technology, DLT. It also doesn't apply because it's not.
Doesn't apply because it's not a ledger.
It's not just a ledger. It's
no,
like,
it's. I mean, I think of it in the following way. So in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there were about 6 projects around the globe that were all looking at something called hypermedia and multimedia, right? And Tim Berners Lee had one of those projects, and one by one they all sort of managed to not really deliver on a global scale, except for Tim's, and that's the birth of the web. But the birth of the web was a compromise from day one, right? That's why Tim always talks about the semantic web. But even his vision didn't go far enough. I mean, I can say this because I was a chair appointed by him, and I remember having the conversation with him. And I said 2 things to him. I said, look, the semantic web, great, but there are 2 fundamental things that you're missing. One is provenance, and I wish we'd built it in from the beginning. And the other is behavioural typing, because once you get something off the web, what's really important next is what you do as a result of getting it. So you can think of it as you getting it as an event, you see it, and you do something in response to it. And that's how we interact on the web in general. And behavioural typing within RChain can cover the behavioural side. And the fact that we're a scalable blockchain with arbitrary data gives us provenance for free. And so it was for me, this is the web as it should have been.
Yeah.
So you actually said that shit to Steve Ross? To Tim Berners Lee?
Yeah, he wasn't Sir Tim then. He was just Tim. Yeah, I was having a lobster salad in Boston whilst he was asking me questions about choreography, working group, and what I wanted to do with it, what was my vision about it before I was appointed. And when I got appointed, it was shortly after being appointed that I met Greg.
Wow.
Right, but no, I had this discussion with Tim more than once. And yeah, the reason why choreography has a relationship to what we're doing now is because we were just dealing with behavior as it's expressed by what are called multi-party session types. Multi-party session types is the collaborative behavior of a system. So you think of lots of actors doing stuff like jazz musicians, and it's kind of like the loose script that people follow, where they know how they synchronize, as opposed to a conductor who's telling everybody what to do or how to synchronize. Jazz musicians like Nora, you do it because there's a pattern you're following. There's some rules that you have, and they're relatively loose, and you can kind of change them a little bit, but you just learn to do that in real time as a jazz musician. And for choreography, we wanted to express if you like, the dance that musicians and dancers have for multiple parties. We wanted to be able to express that and capture it. And that's not really that different. It is different, but it's not, in an abstract sense, it's no different to the aspirations that underpin the type system that we want to have for Rolang, right? So in being appointed in this way and then going down this route and giving birth to multi-party session types, there's a whole genre in the process algebra space. I constantly had those conversations with Tim.
Amazing.
Not once, many times.
So are you keeping up with his semantic web project?
I've always kept up with it. And if you imagine, so I think the next massive revolution that's coming has a relationship to a lot of the stuff Tim was doing on the semantic web and still is. And that is the application of AI. We know that AI took a massive leap forward as more and more information was being stored by Google and Amazon and Facebook. Just pick those three, right? Prior to those, the data was in lots of different repositories. It wasn't, they acted like a gravitational pull for whole bunches of data. And so AI algorithms work best when there's lots of data to train against or lots of data to infer from, right? They need the data. It's the leavened bread for AI and ML. So it gave birth to open source AI and ML that we now see today, that's now habitually used. When we're on Facebook and we get those stupid ads, that's AI at work, right?
Well, it sure sucks.
It's quite interesting. It's right? Quite interesting actually, because the chain will provide much more data, right? You'll now have transactional data, which is not something that is provided on the web today. It's not, Google does not collect transactional data, at least not of, right? And so, or if it is, it's violating its user agreements. What I've been thinking about a lot recently, because I'm reading Judea Pearl's book, The Book of Why, which talks about sort of lifting statistical analysis up into the world of causation, right? So there was this really strange period which cost many people their lives, in which science sort of fell prey to this idea that we can't explicitly represent or talk about causation, right? Which is why the whole smoking causes cancer debate was so prolonged, because the statisticians just would not be willing to look at the data from a causal perspective. But anyway, Judea Pearl has given some really nice tools for reasoning about causation against data, and of course it has applications to AI. But I've been thinking a lot about, if you look at the transaction graph, as if, so this is, Alice pays Bob some rev. So there's an arrow from the Alice node to the Bob node, where really by Alice we mean Alice's address and Bob's address. So every address is a node and every transaction is an arrow between two nodes. So if you look at that and pretend that it's a causal graph, then you can do all kinds of tricks that Pearl has identified in terms of the overall financial data. And prior to blockchains, you didn't have that graph, but now we have it. And so you can do really interesting things that are not strictly machine learning. They are a step above machine learning. So
I think you've reached that position. I think you've reached that position coming from a different place to me.
Oh yeah.
Because I've reached that same position, but the place I've come through and from was simply to do with my other sort of life that I have, where I do this strategic consultancy, which is and there's a lot of AI and ML about it. And if you have data sets, so there's no doubt RChain can have the same sort of data sets that you would see in S3 buckets, in Amazon and on the Google Cloud and all the rest of it. So we have the same, potentially, in terms of how we grow, we can have the same data. But what we have over and above that is the causal trail. And what they don't have in AI is the causal trail. They have to infer it.
Correct.
Right? There's no way, because they don't keep, if you think of us as a global state machine, on day one, the state was whatever it was. On day 1 + 1 tick, it changed, and so on. And you can track all those changes, right? And
Absolutely.
so what you've got is this amazing record of causally, why did something change? So rather than you just being able to reason about the data, you can reason about the changes to the data. Now that's a hugely, hugely powerful place.
Oh yes,
it's at least as big, if not 10 times as big, as the place where AI is now. But you need a big blockchain, so you need the replacement of the web. So I say we're kind of like, we're Web 10.0. We'll probably skip several steps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. Sorry, I just received a text that I need to take a look at. I agree 100%. We're at 4 minutes before the end of the call, and the other topic is a much bigger one, but maybe I can just put it on the docket for next week.
Well, we love to end with a good cliffhanger.
Awesome.
So thank you all so much for a wonderful discussion today. We can't wait to continue next week with, I'm sure, more very relevant, fascinating, and important topics. So thank you so much to everybody who joined us today, and thank you everyone who's listening right now. Please subscribe to RChain on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, become a member at rchain.coop. And if you or someone you know would like to be a guest, you can email us at climate@rchain.coop. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to all.